Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories from Europe. These are tales of people who ventured into forests and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The first time I saw the Bialowieza forest on a map, it looked like someone spilled ink across the border and forgot to wipe it up. That's what got into my head, I think, this idea that it wasn't a normal patch of trees. It was Poland and Belarus pressed together under a roof of branches, and people talked about it like it still belonged to another century. I went in late September, when the mornings have that cold toffee smell and the fog sits low like a thing resting. I'd taken a week off work and promised myself I'd stop doing productive vacations where I return home more tired than when I left. I wanted quiet. I wanted to walk until my thoughts ran out. The small details were ordinary enough. My cheap thermos leaked coffee into my backpack pocket, so everything smelled vaguely burnt and sweet. I bought a ham and cheese pastry at a petrol station and ate it in my car with the engine off, listening to the tick-tick of cooling metal. I remember my socks were mismatched, one black, one navy, and I kept meaning to fix it but didn't. I had a new headlamp I'd tested in my kitchen the night before, blinding myself off the refrigerator door like an idiot. And I'd forgotten a spoon, so when I stopped later for yogurt, I had to use the flat end of a plastic fork. Stuff like that, normal, forgettable. The trail I chose wasn't anything heroic, just a loop that dipped into older growth with a couple of boardwalk sections over marshy ground. It was supposed to be well marked. I told myself well marked meant safe, which is not how forests work, but that's what my brain decided that day. About 40 minutes in, I noticed the first strange thing and didn't even admit it was strange until later. The birds stopped. Not like a dramatic movie moment, more like I realized I couldn't remember hearing them for a while. The forest wasn't silent exactly. There was wind up high moving in the canopy. There were tiny noises, sticks settling, a distant creak like a branch rubbing another branch, but the usual little chirps and rustles were just gone. I blamed it on time of day, or weather, or me being too keyed up. I was still in that stage where you don't feel scared yet, but you also aren't relaxed, like you're waiting for your shoulders to drop and they just won't. Then I found a boot print in the trail. It was sharp, like it had been pressed into wet soil minutes ago. A big lug pattern, maybe hiking boots, and the weird thing was, it was alone. There were no other prints leading up to it and none leading away. Just one perfect imprint, like someone had stepped down from the sky, paused, and then stepped back out of existence. I stared at it longer than I should have. I remember thinking very calmly that maybe the ground had been disturbed and then settled. Maybe the rest of the trail was too dry to hold prints. That's what I told myself. I even laughed like, okay, sure, that's plausible. But my mouth was dry, like I'd swallowed chalk. I walked on. A little later the path narrowed and there was a place where the undergrowth opened up into a shallow hollow, not a ravine, more like a bowl. The ground dipped and then rose again and the trees leaned inward, and for some reason it reminded me of an old amphitheater. I started down into it and the air changed. It got colder and there was a smell that made my stomach turn before my brain could label it. Not rot, not exactly. More like wet iron and something sour, like the inside of an old fridge. I stopped and tried to find the source. Dead animal, I thought, that's all, something died in there. Forests do that, they don't ask permission. That's when I heard my name, not shouted, not whispered either. It was spoken normally, like someone behind me at a bus stop, just my name, in my mother's voice. I don't mean it sounded like a woman. I mean the exact cadence she uses, with that tiny upward lilt at the end like she's checking I'm listening. I actually turned, smiling reflexively, and the smile died halfway because there was nobody. Just trees and fog and that bowl-shaped dip ahead of me. I stood there with my hand still half raised, like I'd been about to wave. My first thought, honestly, was that I was tired and my brain did a weird thing. People hear voices sometimes, especially if they're alone, especially if they want comfort. My mother had been calling me a lot lately. We had this ongoing argument about me working too much and never visiting. So maybe my head just filled in a sound it expected. That's what I told myself while my skin prickled up my arms. I walked again, but slower. My eyes kept checking the sides of the trail, the way you do when you're looking for a friend who might jump out and scare you, except I was alone. There was no friend, and I didn't want anything jumping out. The hollow felt wrong in a way I can't properly explain without sounding dramatic. The trees didn't look different, but they felt arranged, like the spacing was too even, like a corridor. The fog was thicker down there, and it made the trunks look like pillars. And then I heard my name again. This time it came from ahead of me down in the hollow, my mother's voice closer, patient, like she was calling me out of a shop. I stopped so abruptly my boots skidded on damp leaves. I remember thinking very specifically about the boardwalk sections and how the wooden planks had been slick, and how annoying it was that my boots were already muddy. That's the kind of thought you have right before your brain tries to protect you from noticing what's happening. Because a second later, something moved in the fog. At first, I thought it was a deer. The shape was the right height, a pale blur shifting between trunks. I even started to form the word deer in my mouth, like naming it would make it normal, but it wasn't moving like an animal. It was too steady, too deliberate, and it was upright. I couldn't see details at first, just a vertical form. Then it stepped into a slightly clearer patch and I saw, I don't know, skin I guess, not fur, pale skin that looked wet like it had been soaked. Its shoulders were narrow and too high like they were pulled up. The arms, this is the part that still hits me when I'm trying to fall asleep. Its arms hung so low its fingers brushed the leaf litter as it walked. Not dragging, just barely touching like it was tasting the ground with them. I started backing up. I didn't run yet. I kept trying to keep it in the category of person. Lost hiker maybe, someone sick, someone playing a joke. My mind grabbed at anything. I even thought maybe a local guide, which makes no sense, but panic makes you stupid. It lifted its head toward me, and the place where its face should have been there was skin smooth and pale like a blank mask. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, not even indentations, just stretched flesh over a skull shape. That was the moment my body decided for me. My legs moved without asking my brain. I turned and ran up out of the hollow, slipping twice, my lungs already burning like I'd been sprinting for miles. Behind me there was a sound like footsteps, but wrong, not the crunch of boots, more like something wet slapping leaves. And under it my mother's voice again, closer now, saying my name in that same calm tone. I remember this ridiculous thought, it doesn't even sound out of breath. The trail twisted, and I didn't look back at first because I knew if I did and it was right there, I would freeze. I just ran. My backpack thumped against my spine. The thermos banged. I could taste coffee bitterness in the back of my throat like I just burped it up. At some point, I came to a split where the markings were faded and I hesitated. That hesitation almost got me because the voice changed. It wasn't my mother anymore. It was mine. My own voice behind me calling out, wait, don't, like I was begging someone to stop running. It hit me so hard my knees went weak. Something in my brain did a hard reset like this is impossible. That's not a person. That's not anything I can reason with. I picked the left path at random and kept going. The forest started doing that thing where every direction looks the same. I could tell I was drifting off trail, pushing through wet ferns and low branches. My hands were scratched. I remember noticing sap on my palm, sticky and sweet, and thinking stupidly that it would be hard to wash off later. Then I burst into a clearing I hadn't seen on my map. It wasn't a meadow, it was more like a scar, an area where trees had been cut long ago and never properly regrown. The ground was uneven and full of stumps. In the middle was a structure, an old hunting blind or cabin, half collapsed, the roof caved in. The wood was gray and splintered like bone. I ran toward it because my brain wanted walls. It wanted corners. It wanted something that wasn't endless trees. Inside, it smelled like mold and old smoke. There were bits of broken glass and a rusted tin cup on the floor. I nearly fell going in because the doorway was tilted. I crouched behind a section of fallen roof, trying to make myself small, trying to get my breathing under control. That's when the tapping started. Not on the door, not on the walls, on the floorboards beneath me. A slow, careful tapping, like fingernails testing wood. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed my mouth shut to keep from making noise. My heart was slamming so hard I thought it would drown out everything. Then, right beside my knee, something pale rose through a gap in the collapsed boards, like a bare shoulder pushing up from underneath, streaked with dirt, and an arm followed, bending at an angle no elbow should bend. The hand came up last, fingers too long, nails dark with soil, feeling around blindly. It wasn't climbing up like a person, it was unfolding. I couldn't even scream. I just scrambled backward, banging my shoulder on a beam, and the beam shifted with a loud crack that felt like a gunshot in that quiet. The pale arm froze, and the voice, my voice, came from under the floor, soft and right beneath me. "It's okay, I'm here." I ran out of that place so fast I left my backpack. I didn't decide to, I just did. One moment it was on my shoulders, the next it was gone, caught on something, and I didn't stop to free it. I remember the strap slipping off my arm like a snake. I ran until my lungs felt raw and I could taste blood. I ran until I saw the boardwalk again, thank God, and then I ran faster because boardwalk meant trail, trail meant other people, cars, the world. When I finally hit an actual marked junction, there were voices, real voices, and I almost collapsed. A couple, older, wearing bright jackets, looked at me like I was having a medical emergency. I tried to say something sensible. I think I just said, "I got turned around," which is such a useless understatement it makes me angry now. I walked with them back toward the main area. I didn't tell them about the voice or the thing under the floorboards. I didn't want to see their faces change. I didn't want to make it real in a different way. Back at the car park, I sat in my car with the doors locked and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I stared at the trees like they might lean in and speak. I drove to my guest house and showered so hot my skin turned pink. I kept smelling that wet iron scent even after soap. I thought it was in my hair. I thought it was in my nose. That night, when I finally convinced myself to go back for my backpack, because it had my wallet, my keys, everything, I didn't go alone. I found a young guy at the lodge named Darius Kwiatkowski who agreed to walk to the clearing with me in the morning. He had this practical, bored demeanor like he'd heard 1,000 stories from tourists. We found the collapsed cabin. My backpack was there, just inside the doorway, exactly where I must have dropped it. That should have been comforting. But the top pocket was open, and inside my thermos, still leaking, had been set upright, cleaned off, placed neatly like someone had taken care to present it. Next to it was my plastic fork from the yogurt, snapped in half and arranged into a perfect little cross shape. Darius looked at it for a long second. Then he said very quietly, "We go now." He didn't ask me why it mattered. And I didn't ask him why his face had gone pale. I left that day. I didn't finish the hike. I didn't even stop to get lunch. I just drove until the trees thinned and the road widened and the world felt normal again. Sometimes, this is the part I hate admitting, I'll be alone in my apartment and I'll hear my mother's cadence in my head, calling my name. And I'll have to remind myself it's just memory. Just my brain doing what brains do. But every so often, right as I'm falling asleep, I'll hear my own voice say it back. Story 2. The Carpathians have this way of making you feel like a guest in a house that's been occupied for a long time. Not haunted in the cliché sense, just watched. Like the mountains are old enough to have opinions. I went to Romania on a cheap flight because I'd gotten dumped in the most boring way possible. Text message, 2 sentences, no punctuation, and I needed to do something that made my life feel like mine again. I booked a small cabin near a village I'm still not sure I can pronounce correctly. I think it was Bistreet in Assad County, but don't quote me. The point is, it was far enough out that the roads narrowed into gravel and the pine trees started leaning over like they were trying to listen. The cabin was advertised as rustic, which is code for you'll be cold. The heater clanked and the hot water took 3 minutes to arrive, and the kitchen knife was so blunt I had to saw tomatoes like I was cutting wood. I remember I brought a paperback I never opened. I brought fancy trail mix with dried mango, and I ate all the mango first like a child. And I'd packed a new wool sweater that itched like it was made out of tiny wire brushes, but I wore it anyway because it smelled clean and familiar. The first night was calm. I sat on the porch with a beer and watched the line of the forest swallow the last light. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, and the sound came back warped, like the trees chewed it up before returning it. In the morning, I decided to follow a trail that started behind the cabin. It wasn't on any official map I had, but there was a faint path and an old red paint mark on a tree. It looked like the kind of thing locals use, not tourists. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I wasn't stupid. I told myself I'd come back before dark. The first hour was honestly nice. Cold air, my breath visible, boots crunching frost. I saw deer tracks. I saw mushrooms that looked like orange cups. I stopped to retie my laces because one kept loosening. And I got annoyed with myself for not double knotting like I always do. Mundane stuff. The world still felt safe. Then I noticed the trees had scars, not natural damage, not deer rubbing antlers, long vertical gouges too high up as if something had dragged a hand or a tool down the trunk from above my head. The bark was torn and pale beneath, fresh too, sap still wet. I blamed bears. That's what you do. You see something that could be bear-related and you put it in the bear box in your brain. Bear makes sense. Bear has rules. You can Google bear. I kept going, but I started talking out loud to myself. Not full sentences, just little noises, clearing my throat, singing half a line of a song, anything to announce my presence to bears that might be nearby. The trail narrowed until it was basically a suggestion, and then it ended at a place that made no sense. A circle, not a fairy ring mushroom circle. A circle of trees bent inward, their trunks curved like they'd grown that way under pressure. Inside the ring, the ground was bare, no leaves, no moss, just dark soil like it had been turned over again and again. At the center was a stump, and on top of the stump sat a bundle of hair. I don't mean a tuft, I mean a thick coil like someone had cut a braid off a head and placed it there. It was dark brown, glossy, and tied with a strip of cloth. I stood there staring at it, and my first thought was, someone's joke, some teenager, some weird local ritual thing. Then I realized the strip of cloth looked like my sweater, the itchy wool one. I actually checked myself, yanking at the hem, and my stomach dropped because there was a missing strip along the bottom edge, like someone had torn it clean off without me noticing. My skin went prickly. My hands went cold, and I did this dumb thing where I turned in a slow circle looking for pranksters. That's when I heard footsteps. Careful, soft footsteps on leaves behind me, but when I turned, nothing. Just the trail and trees. I told myself maybe it was my own footsteps echoing. Maybe it was the wind shifting leaves. Maybe I was spooked by the stupid hair bundle and imagining things. I started backing away from the circle, and the air changed again. It felt thicker, like walking into a room where someone just stopped talking. A voice called out from the trees, "Come back." Not a shout, not a whisper, calm, almost bored. It sounded like me. I froze. I could feel sweat at the base of my spine under the wool sweater. I could taste metal in my mouth. The voice came again, closer. "You dropped something." I looked down without thinking. My hands were empty. My pockets were zipped. I hadn't dropped anything. That's when I noticed my footprints. They were going toward the circle, but there were no footprints going away from it, just like I'd appeared there and never left. My brain couldn't hold that. It kept trying to fix it. Maybe the frost melted. Maybe the leaves shifted, maybe I was looking wrong. And then something moved between the curved trunks at the edge of the circle. It wasn't stepping out into the open. It stayed half hidden, like it understood the advantage of not being seen fully. I saw a shoulder first, clothed like a jacket, then an arm, then a hand that lifted slowly. The hand was wearing my watch that I was still wearing, except it wasn't on a wrist. It was strapped around something too thin, too long, jointed wrong. The skin beneath was pale and hairless, stretched tight, and the fingers were, I'm going to sound insane, but they looked like someone had tried to make human fingers out of wax and failed. Too smooth, too even. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, and immediately the forest did that thing where it punishes you for panic. Roots grabbed at my ankles, branches smacked my face, my lungs burned in the cold. Behind me I heard running too, but not crashing, not stumbling. It followed my path perfectly, matching my pace, like it knew exactly how fast I could go, and it kept talking, my voice right behind my ear, saying things that made my stomach twist. You're tired. Stop. I can carry it. Let me. At some point I realized the voice wasn't getting out of breath. It was steady, like someone speaking into a microphone. I made a decision without thinking it through. Instead of following the faint trail back, I cut hard downhill toward what I thought was a stream I'd heard earlier. Water means direction. Water means you can follow it out. That's the logic my terrified brain grabbed. I slid down a slope on my backside, ripping my pants, not caring. I hit the stream, a narrow, icy ribbon, and stumbled along it, boots splashing. The cold water soaked my socks and made my feet numb almost instantly. The voice stopped. That was worse, because silence means it's closer, or it's thinking, or it's gone and you don't know which. I kept moving along the stream until I saw something ahead, a fallen tree bridging the water like a crude bridge. I climbed over it, slipping on wet bark, and on the other side, hanging from a low branch, was a strip of my sweater, not missing now. A different strip, freshly torn, dangling like a marker. I stopped. My brain refused to move for a second. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud. Then, across the stream, the leaves on the opposite bank shifted, just slightly, like something was crouched there, trying to stay low but failing because it was too tall. I didn't look directly. I couldn't. I just backed away, then turned and sprinted again, following the stream until the trees thinned and I saw the first sign of a fence line. When I finally burst out near a dirt road, my legs gave out and I sat in the mud like a child. I remember laughing once, a short, hysterical bark, because my phone had been in airplane mode the whole time and I'd had no service anyway. I made it back to the cabin. I locked the door. I pushed a chair under the handle like that would matter, and that's where the aftermath hit. On the porch, right in front of the door, was my other shoe, the one I hadn't lost, the one that should have been on my foot. It was set neatly toe forward like someone had placed it there carefully, and inside it was a braid of dark hair, coiled like a sleeping snake. I left the keys on the table and walked away without packing. I drove until I hit a city, checked into a hotel, and bought a new sweater at a mall because I couldn't stand the feeling of wool anymore. Sometimes, when I'm tired and catch my reflection in a dark window, I swear my face doesn't line up for half a second, like something's trying to learn it, and then it snaps back and I tell myself I'm being ridiculous. But I don't go into forests alone now, not in Europe, not anywhere. Story 3. I took the job in Sweden because it sounded like the kind of thing you brag about later. Remote conservation work, a month in a research cabin, monitoring. I pictured cozy evenings, notebooks, quiet radio chatter, maybe seeing an elk if I got lucky. The reality was a small wooden hut in a spruce stand so thick it blocked the sky. The cabin had one room, one bunk, a little propane stove that hissed like an angry cat, and a solar battery that complained if you charged your phone and headlamp at the same time. I brought instant oatmeal, a tin of smoked fish I regretted immediately, and a pack of cheap pens that kept leaking ink in the cold. The first few days were boring in the way boring can be soothing. I checked trail cameras, logged animal movement, replaced memory cards. I'd eat oatmeal standing up because sitting made me sleepy. I'd brush my teeth outside because the cabin sink was basically a decorative suggestion. I listened to the same playlist until I hated every song. And then one morning, one of the cameras was gone. Not broken, not knocked over. The strap was cut clean and the camera itself just vanished. The tree had a little rectangle of lighter bark where it had been strapped like a tan line. I blamed people, hunters, kids, maybe another team messing with gear. That's what you do, you pick the human explanation first because it's safer. I followed the line of trees looking for tracks. There were none, not in the snow, not in the mud. Just smooth ground as if nothing heavy had walked there. The weird part was what I found instead. A neat pile of spruce needles arranged in a spiral on the ground, and in the center, the camera's memory card placed like an offering. I stared at it, trying to make myself laugh, like, okay, someone's messing with me. Someone has a sense of humor. I took the card back to the cabin and plugged it into my laptop. Most of the footage was normal. Elk passing, foxes sniffing, the occasional blur of a bird. Then, in the night footage from 2 nights before, something appeared. It didn't walk into frame. It rose, out of the snow itself like the ground was liquid. A shape pushed up slowly, first a round hump, then shoulders, then a head. It stood there motionless, facing the camera. I couldn't see a face because the infrared washed it out, but I could see its posture, wrong, slightly bent, like it didn't know how to hold itself upright. Then it leaned forward and pressed what looked like a hand flat against the lens. The hand filled the frame, and on the palm there were lines, deep, dark grooves, but they weren't palm lines, they were letters, not words I recognized, but carved marks like someone had written on skin with a knife. The next clip was just static, then nothing. I sat there in the cabin with the laptop humming and the stove hissing and the forest outside so quiet it felt like listening. I told myself it was a glitch, an animal close to the lens, frost distortions. I said those words out loud just to hear a human voice. That night the tapping started on the cabin wall. Not banging, not scratching, a slow pattern like someone using a knuckle. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I didn't answer. I lay in the bunk with my headlamp off, staring at the darkness, listening to my own heartbeat. The tapping moved from the wall to the window. Tap, tap, tap. I kept my eyes shut so hard my forehead hurt. I told myself it was a branch, wind, a pine cone falling, anything. Then the radio crackled. A voice came through, thin, distorted, but familiar enough that my stomach clenched. My supervisor's voice, Liesel Merck, saying, "Are you there? Respond, it's urgent." I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Liesel," I whispered, because whispering felt safer, which is ridiculous. The voice came back immediately. "Open the door." That wasn't something she'd ever say. Protocol was never "open the door." Protocol was "stay put." I started to answer, then stopped. Because the radio light wasn't on, it wasn't transmitting. It wasn't even powered. The battery pack was out, sitting on the table where I'd left it earlier. The voice came again anyway, now softer, almost pleading. "I'm freezing, please." I sat up in bed, my whole body buzzing with adrenaline. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't move away either. I just sat there, frozen in the middle of the cabin like a scared animal. Outside, something shifted against the wood, a weight leaning in. The cabin creaked. Then through the thin plank wall I felt it, a pressure like fingertips pressing from the outside, indenting the wood in 5 separate points. The wood bowed inward slightly, as if it had become soft. For a second, I swear I could see the shape of the fingers through the grain, like a bruise forming on skin. Then the fingertips dragged downward, slowly, leaving 5 long grooves in the wood as if it were wet clay. I made a sound I didn't recognize as mine, half sob, half gasp. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the laptop without thinking, and climbed out the back window because I couldn't make myself go near the door. The snow outside was knee-deep and my boots weren't even laced properly. I just ran. I ran toward the nearest service road, following the GPS arrow on my phone even though the screen kept dimming in the cold. I slipped twice, fell once, scraped my hand on ice. My breath came out in ragged bursts. Behind me, I heard the cabin door open. I hadn't unlocked it. I hadn't even touched it. I didn't look back. I kept moving until I saw the faint line of the road through the trees. When I reached it, my truck was there, thank God, the one solid thing in that nightmare. I fumbled the keys so badly I dropped them in the snow and had to dig with numb fingers. The engine didn't start the first try. It coughed like it was mocking me. On the second try, it turned over. As I drove away, I forced myself, just once, to glance in the rearview mirror. Between the trees, far back on the road, something stood in the center like it was waiting for a ride. Tall but not towering, still, watching, and the worst part, this is the image I can't get rid of, was that it held my missing trail camera up to where its face should have been, like it was filming me leaving. Later in daylight, I went back with 2 other workers. I didn't want to, but they insisted on retrieving equipment and checking the cabin. Inside, the grooves on the wall were there. 5 long channels, deep enough that you could fit a fingertip into them. Everyone got quiet when they saw them, but the aftermath proof, the thing that still makes my stomach roll, was on the table. The laptop was open, my laptop powered on. On the screen was a live feed from my trail camera, a close-up of my face filmed from inside the cabin while I had been sleeping. I don't remember setting up any camera in there. I didn't own anything that could do that. I quit the job the next day. People asked why, and I gave them a normal answer about mental health and not being a good fit, because I didn't have words for the truth. Sometimes I think I hear Liesel's voice on the radio in my car when I'm driving alone. It's never on, it's never connected, just a faint crackle and a calm tone saying my name like she's right there. I don't answer anymore. Story 4. There's a stretch of forest in Scotland where the pines grow so tight you can't see 10 meters off the path. It's not the wild highlands kind of romantic, it's plantation forest, straight lines, dark needles, ground covered in brown carpet, no undergrowth to soften anything. It feels manufactured, like a place designed for something other than people. I was there because of my uncle, Tavish McRae, who left me his caravan after he died. Not a fancy one. A dented old thing he'd parked near a loch for fishing weekends. I hadn't been close to him, which I felt guilty about in that dull, constant way grief gives you, so I went up alone to sort it out. Take what was worth taking, sell the rest, say a quiet goodbye. The caravan smelled like damp fabric and old tobacco. There were crumbs in the drawer from biscuits he must have eaten in bed. A tiny calendar still hung by the sink, stuck on April. I found a lighter shaped like a fish. I found a bag of hard candies so old they'd fused together. I found his notebook full of fishing notes and little sketches of clouds like he got bored and started doodling. It was a peaceful day, cold but bright. I made tea and it tasted faintly like the plastic of the kettle no matter how many times I rinsed it. I told myself I'd be done by evening. Then I found the second door. It was behind a hanging coat, a narrow hatch cut into the caravan wall, leading to a crawl space underneath, like he'd built a storage compartment. I didn't remember it from childhood. I didn't even know caravans had spaces like that. The hatch had a padlock. That was odd. Tavish didn't lock anything. He barely locked his car. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now, but it felt like a final message, a thing he'd kept. I found the key taped under the table like he'd wanted someone to find it eventually. When I unlocked the hatch and pulled it open, cold air breathed out, damp and earthy. The crawl space was dark, but my phone light caught something immediately, scratch marks. Not on the wood, on the underside of the hatch itself. 4 lines, deep, fresh-looking, like something had clawed from inside trying to get out. I told myself it was rodents or a badger. Something got in and panicked. That was my rational box. Then I crawled in far enough to see what was at the back. A jar, a clear glass jar with a metal lid, sitting on the dirt like it had been placed carefully. Inside it was teeth. Not animal teeth, at least not like any animal I recognize. Too flat, too even, human-looking but wrong in size and shape. Some were too long, some too small, all of them clean. My stomach turned. I backed out fast, banging my elbow. Above me inside the caravan, something shifted. A footstep. I froze, half in the hatch, half out, my shoulders wedged. I held my breath, listening. Another footstep, slow, careful. I pushed myself out and grabbed the nearest thing, Tavish's fishing rod, like that would help, and turned toward the caravan interior. The curtains were still. The air was still. No one. I laughed once, sharp and nervous, telling myself it was the caravan settling. Wind, my own movement. Then the kettle whistled. I hadn't put it on. I stared at the stove. The knob was turned. Blue flame flickering under the kettle. My skin crawled. I turned the stove off so hard I nearly broke the knob. My mind kept reaching for explanations. Maybe I bumped it. Maybe it was already on and I didn't notice. Maybe. From outside, beyond the thin caravan wall, I heard Tavish's voice. He was dead. I'd been at the funeral. I'd seen the coffin. But the voice came anyway, calm and familiar, saying, "Open up. It's cold out here." I stood there with the fishing rod in my hand, my heart pounding, thinking, someone's doing a cruel joke. Someone heard about my uncle. Someone knows his voice. Then the voice chuckled, exactly the way Tavish used to when he was about to tell a story, and it made my eyes sting with sudden tears because grief is stupid like that. I walked to the door before I could stop myself. My hand touched the latch, and from the crawlspace hatch behind me I heard scratching, not frantic, slow, patient. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I jerked away from the door, backing into the tiny kitchenette. The voice outside came again. "Just let me in." The scratching grew louder, like whatever was underneath was pressing closer. Then the caravan rocked. A gentle sway at first, like someone leaning against it. Then again harder. My cup of tea slid across the table and spilled, steaming and brown, and the smell of tannins filled the air. I ran for the back window and shoved it open, climbing out into the cold. I landed awkwardly and almost fell, but I didn't care. I sprinted across the little gravel patch toward my car. Behind me, the caravan door opened. I didn't see who opened it. I didn't look. I heard the hinge creak and the door swing, and I heard the voice, Tavish's voice, now inside the caravan, sighing like it had come home. My car didn't start at first. Of course it didn't. The key turned and nothing happened but a click, and my hands shook so hard I nearly dropped them again. On the second try it started, and I reversed so fast gravel sprayed. As I drove away, I forced myself to glance back. The caravan door stood open. The interior was dark. And in the doorway, just inside the shadow, something stood with its head tilted like it was listening. Its silhouette was almost human, but too narrow, shoulders angled wrong, and when it lifted a hand, the fingers were long and stiff like sticks. I drove until I hit the main road and didn't stop until I reached a town with lights. 2 days later, I went back in daylight with my cousin, Eiley Fraser. We brought a locksmith because I didn't want to touch that hatch again. The caravan looked normal. Quiet, no open door, no movement. Inside, the tea stain had dried dark on the table like a bruise. The aftermath proof was under the table where I'd found the key the first time. A strip of tape was still there, but the key wasn't. In its place, pressed into the sticky residue, was one of those teeth from the jar, set upright like a little white flag. I sold the caravan without mentioning any of it. I told myself it was grief, stress, imagination. But sometimes, when my apartment is quiet and the radiator clicks, I swear I hear gentle scratching from somewhere below the floorboards, like something being patient. Story 5. Northern Spain has forests that feel like they're keeping a secret. Not because they're dense, some of them are actually airy, with sunlight filtering down in a way that makes everything look gentle, but because the ground is old. Old stone, old paths, old places where people have walked for centuries and left parts of themselves behind without realizing it. I was traveling alone, doing the cheap pilgrim-adjacent thing without committing to the actual pilgrimage. I'd hike in the morning, find a place to sleep, eat whatever was available. I was trying to clear my head after quitting a job I hated. I wasn't sad exactly, more like hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of my days. One afternoon, I took what I thought was a shortcut through a patch of forest outside a small village. There was a hand-painted sign pointing down a narrow trail, and the paint was faded, but it looked official enough. I had a bruised banana in my pack, a bottle of water that tasted faintly of iodine from purification tablets, and a blister on my heel I kept pretending wasn't getting worse. The trail went deeper, and the sunlight thinned. The air got cooler. I could hear a stream somewhere but couldn't see it. I remember stopping to pick a pebble out of my shoe and being annoyed that it had worked its way all the way to my toes. Then I found a little shrine, not a church shrine, more like a crude arrangement, stones stacked into a small arch, and beneath it a wooden bowl filled with coins and bits of ribbon. Someone had tied strips of fabric to nearby branches. The fabric fluttered gently, making soft little snapping sounds like tiny flags. I thought it was charming. I even took a photo. I told myself it was for luck, for safe travel, something harmless. I walked past it and the snapping fabric stopped, not because the wind stopped. The wind was still there, moving leaves overhead, but the fabric hung limp, as if the air inside that small area had gone still. I turned back, and for a second I thought my phone camera had glitched because the photo I'd just taken looked wrong. In the image, the shrine was there, but the ribbons were different. They weren't fabric strips anymore. They looked like skin. Pale, thin, semi-translucent, tied in neat little knots. The kind of pale you see on the inside of your own wrist. I stared at the screen, nauseated. I told myself it was lighting, motion blur, my brain being weird. I deleted the photo immediately, like that would delete the feeling. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I moved aside, expecting another hiker, but no one passed. The footsteps stopped when I stopped, as if they were matching me. I walked faster. The sound followed, not running, not chasing, just keeping pace. I told myself it was an echo, or an animal, or someone messing with me. Then a voice came from the trees to my left, gentle and conversational in Spanish, saying, "You forgot your ribbon." I looked, and there, hanging from a branch at eye level, was a strip of cloth torn from my backpack strap. I hadn't noticed it missing. It was tied neatly in the same knot as the others. My hands went cold, my mouth went dry. I untied it quickly, stuffing it in my pocket like it was evidence, like proof I wasn't imagining it. The voice came again, closer. "It suits you." I didn't answer. I kept walking, now almost jogging. The trail curved, and suddenly I was in a section of forest where the trees were closer and the ground dipped into shallow trenches like old irrigation channels. The air smelled damp and green. Then I saw it ahead, a figure on the trail standing with its back to me. Relief hit me so fast I almost laughed. Another person, thank God. I started to call out, "Hello, excuse me, anything?" The figure turned slowly. It looked like a woman at first glance, average height, dark hair, but her face was wrong in a way that my brain tried to fix. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but arranged slightly off, like someone had memorized a face and rebuilt it from memory. The eyes were too close, the mouth too wide, but not in a monstrous way, in a subtle, unsettling way that made my stomach twist. She smiled, and the smile didn't match the rest of her face. It was too practiced, too flat, like she was pulling it on. Then she lifted her hand and held out something. A ribbon, not cloth, pale and thin and slightly glossy. Skin. I backed away so fast I nearly fell into one of the trenches. My heart slammed against my ribs. The woman thing tilted her head and spoke again, still gentle. "Everyone leaves something." I turned and ran the way I'd come. Not caring about shortcuts anymore, not caring about blisters. I ran until the forest thinned and I saw sunlight and the edge of a field. I didn't stop running until I hit a paved road, and a couple walking their dogs stared at me like I was insane. I tried to explain. I couldn't. I just asked for directions back to the village, my voice shaking. That night in a cheap hostel, I emptied my pockets onto the bed to make sure everything was mine. Coins, keys, the strip of cloth. And that's when I found the aftermath proof. In the pocket of my jacket, one I hadn't worn that day, there was a ribbon tied in the same neat knot. Pale, thin, slightly glossy, and when I held it up to the light, I could see tiny pores like goosebumps frozen in place. I threw it away. I washed my hands until the skin was red. I told myself someone slipped it in, a prank, a sick joke, but I still don't wear ribbons. I don't tie anything to trees. And when I walk through forests now, I keep my hands in my pockets like I'm trying to keep all of myself with me. Story 6. Germany has these forests that look like they belong on postcards, tall pines, soft moss, neat trails. The kind of place you'd take a child to teach them about mushrooms and birds. That's what made it worse, I think, the betrayal of how normal it looked. I was doing a weekend hike in the Black Forest with my friend Maja Strehler. We weren't hardcore hikers. We were the kind who bring too many snacks and stop to take photos of cute signs. Maja had one of those tiny cameras with a strap around her wrist, and she kept taking pictures of my boots like she was doing an artsy series. The day started with little annoyances. My water bottle leaked into my bag. Maja forgot sunscreen and complained about it even though it was cloudy. I had a pebble stuck in my shoe for 20 minutes before I finally stopped to shake it out, and I remember the relief being weirdly intense. We were laughing. We weren't scared. The first wrong thing we noticed was the sound. It wasn't silence. It was like the forest had a muffler on. Our footsteps sounded too loud, our voices sounded too close, like the air was thick. We came to a spot where the trail marker was missing, not broken, gone, just a clean nail hole in the tree. Maja said maybe someone stole it. I said maybe it fell. We both laughed because that's the kind of problem you can solve by picking a direction. We picked left. 10 minutes later, we saw the same tree again, same nail hole, same moss pattern, same crooked branch that looked like an arm. We stopped, staring at it. Maja frowned, checking her phone map. No signal. Did we loop? She asked. It's probably a spur trail, I said, because I wanted it to be. We turned around and walked back, and we hit the same tree again. That's when my stomach started to feel hollow. The air tasted different, like wet stone. Maja's face changed, and I realized she was actually scared. She stopped making jokes. We tried to leave the trail completely, pushing through undergrowth to cut out of the loop. We should have been able to hit some other path or at least a different marker. But every time we walked for a while, we ended up back at that tree. It was like the forest was folding. I kept telling myself we were disoriented, that we were unconsciously circling. That panic does that. Then we saw the footprints. 2 sets, mine and Maja's, clearly visible in a patch of damp earth. They led toward the tree. But there were also a third set, bare footprints, long, narrow, with toes that looked wrong, too many, like the front of the foot had been pressed down with extra little points, not quite toes, not quite claws. The bare prints led alongside ours, matching our pace. Then right before the tree they stopped, no prints leading away, just ended. Maja made a noise like she was about to vomit. She grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "We're being followed," she whispered. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to be the rational one, but my throat wouldn't form the words. We heard breathing, not ours. Another breath, close, slow, steady, as if someone was standing right behind the tree listening. Maja raised her camera like a shield. I don't know why, it was just what her hands did. A face appeared from behind the trunk, not peeking like a person, sliding. It moved too smoothly, like the head wasn't connected by a neck, but by something that could rotate without resistance. The skin was the color of ash. The eyes, this is the iconic part burned into my mind, were covered with a thin membrane like a frog's eyelid, milky and glossy, and they blinked sideways, not up and down. It opened its mouth, and instead of teeth, there was a wet mesh, like the inside of a fish's gills, pulsing slightly as if it was breathing through its mouth. Maja screamed. I grabbed her wrist and ran. This time the forest let us leave the loop, but it didn't let us leave easily. Branches grabbed. The ground dipped unexpectedly. We crashed through ferns and nearly fell down a slope. Behind us, something moved, but it didn't chase like a running animal. It kept appearing at the edge of vision, behind trunks, ahead on the side, like it was taking shortcuts through a space that didn't match ours. We reached a logging road, wide open, and the air changed instantly. The muffled feeling lifted like someone removed a blanket from my head. We ran down the road until we found a parked car and a man loading tools. He stared at us like we were lunatics. We babbled. He asked if we were hurt. He offered water. We didn't go back into the forest. We drove to the nearest town, and Maja didn't talk for an hour, just stared out the window. The aftermath proof came later, in the hostel bathroom when Maja checked her photos. Most of them were normal: boots, trees, stupid signposts. Then there was one photo we didn't remember taking. A close-up of the tree with the nail hole, and reflected in the glossy surface of Maja's camera lens, like a little mirror, was that ash-colored face, inches away, membrane eyes half closed, mouth mesh pressed against the glass like it had been smelling it. Maja deleted the photo and cried, but deleting it didn't delete the feeling that it had been close enough to fog the lens. Story 7. In Italy, near the Dolomites, there are valleys where the phone signal dies and the roads become single-lane, and you start to feel like you've driven off the modern world. My brother and I used to love that. We'd chase that sensation like it was freedom. This time I wasn't chasing it. I was there because my brother Luca Ferraro insisted. He'd been going through this phase where he wanted authentic experiences, like sleeping in old shepherd huts and eating cheese straight off a board. I agreed because I was tired of arguing with him, and because part of me missed when we could go somewhere and just be brothers without adulthood in the way. We hiked up to a known bivouac, one of those small, free shelters. It was supposed to be simple: hike in, sleep, hike out. The weather was clear when we started. Luca teased me for bringing an extra pair of socks. I teased him for bringing a tiny bottle of cologne like we were going on a date with the mountains. The hut was a metal box with a door that squealed. Inside it smelled like old sweat and pine resin. There were carved names on the wall. Someone had left a half-burned candle. Someone had left a spoon with the handle bent, mundane leftovers of other hikers. We ate instant pasta. We drank water that tasted faintly of metal from the bottle. Luca kept tapping his foot like he had too much energy. The first wrong thing happened at dusk. We heard bells, not cowbells far away in a meadow. Bells close, moving like a herd passing right outside. Luca went to the door and opened it a crack, expecting to see goats or sheep. There was nothing, no animals, no movement, just empty slope and the darkening line of forest below. The bells continued for another minute, circling the hut as if invisible animals were walking around it. I told myself it was sound carrying weird in the mountains. Echoes, wind, that's what mountains do. They throw sound around. Then the knocking started. 3 knocks on the metal wall, slow, even, knock, knock, knock. Luca looked at me, eyebrows raised, trying to make it a joke. "Someone wants in," he whispered, grinning. I didn't grin back, because the knocks came again, same rhythm, same exact spacing, like a metronome. I called out "hello" in Italian, then in English, because panic makes you try every language you know. No answer. The knocks moved, from the wall to the door. Knock, knock, knock. Luca reached for the handle again, and I grabbed his wrist. Hard. He looked offended. "Don't," I said, and my voice sounded wrong, thin. We sat in silence, listening. The knock stopped. We waited. My throat hurt from swallowing. Luca's foot stopped tapping. Then we heard something scrape along the roof, like nails dragged slowly over metal. Luca went pale. "Probably a pine branch," he whispered. But there were no trees close enough to touch the hut. The scraping became a slow, deliberate dragging back and forth, like something pacing above us. Then through the thin wall a voice came, not loud, intimate, right against the metal. It said in Luca's voice, "Open it, I'm freezing." Luca's eyes snapped to mine. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The voice came again, same tone, same cadence as Luca when he's trying to sound casual. "Come on, just open it." I felt my stomach drop. Luca backed away from the door, shaking his head. I whispered, "Stay quiet," like the hut was a hiding spot. We didn't sleep. We sat with our backs against the wall, our headlamps off, listening to occasional scraping and the faint sound of bells that weren't there. At some point in the early hours, I think it was early, but time felt slippery. We heard a soft thump outside the door like something had been dropped. Luca, shaking, cracked the door open a centimeter, just enough to see the ground. A bundle lay there. It was our extra socks, mine. The ones Luca teased me about, rolled neatly together, tied with a strip of dried grass like a bow. Luca shut the door so hard the metal rang. He looked like he might cry, which I'd never seen from him. At dawn, when the light finally turned the hut interior from black to gray, we opened the door and ran. We didn't pack neatly. We didn't eat. We just left. The valley below looked normal again in daylight. Birds, wind, the world pretending nothing happened. We didn't talk about it until we reached the car. The aftermath proof came when we unpacked later at home. In Luca's backpack, tucked inside a pocket he swore he hadn't opened, was that strip of dried grass, and woven into it like a little braid were 3 strands of hair. Not mine, not Luca's. Pale, almost translucent, he threw his whole backpack away. We still don't talk about it directly, but sometimes when I call him and he doesn't answer, I get this irrational flash of fear, like my own voice might pick up instead. Story 8. In France, there's a forest near the Ardennes where the ground is so damp it feels alive under your boots. I went there because my aunt's friend needed help clearing out an old property, an abandoned house that had belonged to her family, and nobody wanted to be the one to deal with it. It wasn't even a house, really, more like a stone shell with a roof that was trying to give up. The forest had crept right up to it. Ivy through the windows, moss on the steps. The kind of place that looks photogenic until you're standing in it and realizing how many corners there are for something to hide. I was helping because I needed money and because I didn't want to sit in my apartment and feel lonely. Work felt safer than stillness. The woman who owned it, Clotilde Vasseur, met me at the gate with a ring of keys and an apologetic smile. She had the kind of voice that makes you want to trust her. She told me casually, "If you hear anything, it's just the house settling." People always say that, like houses are living things that sigh. Inside, we found old furniture covered in sheets, dust so thick it made my nose itch, a smell of damp paper. I found a box of photographs where the faces had stuck to the glass, blurred and half melted. I found a set of children's shoes lined neatly by a wall like someone planned to come back. Before anything supernatural happened, there were just these little human annoyances. My gloves were too thin and my fingers went numb. The tape on the cardboard boxes wouldn't stick because of the cold. Clotilde kept misplacing her keys and then finding them in her own pocket, laughing awkwardly each time. My back hurt from lifting. Then we heard the whistling. A soft tune off-key coming from upstairs. Clotilde froze. "There's no one here," she whispered, like she was reminding herself. I wanted to be logical. Squatters, birds, wind through broken boards. But the tune, it sounded like someone trying to remember a song, stopping and starting, repeating the same few notes like they were stuck. We went upstairs together. The stairs creaked under our weight and dust puffed up with each step. The whistling stopped when we reached the landing. In the hallway, there was a door we hadn't noticed downstairs, small, low, like a child's door built into the wall. No knob, just a latch. Clotilde stared at it like she'd never seen it before. "That wasn't there," she said. I wanted to laugh. Of course it was there, we just missed it, but I believed her. I don't know why. Her face had that pale, flat look of someone whose brain is refusing to accept a new fact. I crouched and unlatched it. Inside was a narrow space between walls, not a room. A gap, bare wood, cobwebs dark. My phone light caught something on the floor, lines drawn in soot. Symbols maybe, or just scratches. And then I saw the eyes, 2 pale reflections deep in the gap, low to the ground, watching. I flinched back so hard I hit my head on the doorframe. Clotilda grabbed my shoulder. I told myself it was a cat, a raccoon, something living in the walls. Then the eyes blinked, sideways like a lizard, and a hand slid forward into the light. It was small, child-sized, but the fingers were too long and the joints bulged as if the bones were stacked wrong. The nails were black with soot. The hand reached out and drew one slow line on the floor with a fingertip, leaving a clean trail through dust as if writing. It wrote my name, not letters exactly, but the shape, the rhythm. My brain recognized it as my name the way you recognize your name in terrible handwriting. I backed away, shaking. Clotilda made a small sound like a whimper. The hand retreated. From inside the gap, a voice came, soft and breathy, like someone speaking through cloth. "Stay." Ran. We didn't even shut the upstairs windows. We stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling out the front door into the cold air. Clotilda was crying, repeating, "It's not possible," over and over. The aftermath proof came when she unlocked her car. On the passenger seat, neatly folded, was one of the dust sheets from the furniture. And in the center of it, pressed into the fabric like an imprint, was a tiny handprint, 5 long fingers, soot black, exactly the size of the hand we saw. Clotilda sold the property within the month. She didn't go back. I never asked what happened to the house. Sometimes, though, when I'm unpacking boxes in my own apartment, I'll find a fine layer of black dust inside a sealed container, and I'll have this flash of the gap between walls and those sideways blinking eyes. Story 9. Norway in winter makes you understand why people invented stories. The dark is too long, the forest's too quiet. Your brain needs something to chew on besides the sound of snow. I was driving north to visit a friend and misjudged the road. It was one of those stupid mistakes where you trust the GPS too much. It routed me onto a smaller road to save time, and I didn't question it until the plows stopped coming and the snow started building in ridges. My car slid into a shallow ditch. Not dramatic, not a crash, just stuck. I tried rocking it. I tried digging with my hands until my fingers went numb. I tried calling, but there was no service. I sat there with the engine off to save fuel, wrapped in my coat, chewing on a protein bar that tasted like cardboard and peanut butter. I remember the wrapper was loud in the quiet. I remember my breath fogged the windshield. I remember my knees ached from being bent. Then I saw the lights, not headlights, small lights bobbing between the trees like lanterns, 3 of them moving slowly, spaced evenly apart. Relief hit me hard enough to make my eyes sting. People, help. I got out and waved, my boots sinking into snow. "Hello," I shouted. "Hey." The lights stopped, and I realized I couldn't see anyone holding them. No bodies, no arms, just the lights floating at chest height between trunks. I told myself it was a trick of distance, darkness hiding people, snow reflecting. Then one light moved closer and I saw what it was. It wasn't a lantern, it was a small glass jar. Inside the jar was a moth, fluttering weakly, glowing faintly like it had swallowed a candle. The jar floated, suspended in the air, moving toward me with slow intention. My stomach dropped. I backed toward my car. The other jars moved too, keeping their spacing like they were herding. A voice came from the woods, gentle, almost kind, in Norwegian. I don't speak Norwegian well, but I understood one word: come. I shook my head, backing away. "No," I said, like that mattered. The jars stopped. The moth inside one of them beat its wings harder and the light inside flickered. Then from behind me inside my car, the interior light turned on. I froze. I hadn't touched the door. The car was locked. The keys were in my pocket. The light stayed on, illuminating the front seat, and on the passenger seat sat a jar identical to the ones in the woods. Inside it, a moth glowed faintly, fluttering. I don't know what noise I made. I yanked the driver door open and dove in, slamming it shut and locking it even though it already was. Outside, the jars drifted closer, stopping just beyond the car like they couldn't cross an invisible boundary. The voice came again, closer now, from somewhere just beyond my headlights. "Come, warm." My breath came in short, shaky bursts. I started the engine. It sputtered, then caught. I put it in gear and tried to drive out of the ditch, tires spinning, the jars bobbed, waiting. I rocked the car back and forth harder, snow spraying. Finally, with a lurch, it freed itself and slid back onto the road. I didn't look back. I drove until my hands stopped shaking and I hit a main road with actual lights and signs. The aftermath proof came when I stopped at a gas station and opened my passenger door to grab my bag. The jar was still there, but the moth inside was gone, and the lid had been unscrewed and set neatly beside it, as if whatever trapped it had decided to let it out. I left the jar on the pavement and drove away. I didn't want to bring it with me. I didn't want to give it a ride. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and see distant lights between trees, my hands grip the wheel so hard my knuckles ache. Story 10. There's a forest in Slovenia where the limestone caves breathe cold air up through cracks in the ground, and you can feel it on your ankles even on a warm day. I went there because my friend said it was beautiful, karst landscape, hidden sinkholes, the kind of place you put on social media with a caption about nature healing you. I went because I wanted to be healed, I guess, or at least distracted. I was with a small group, 3 of us. My friend Anya Koren and her co-worker, Balint Shales, and me. We drove out early, stopped at a bakery for pastries that left flaky crumbs all over the car seats. Balint kept complaining about his GPS. Anya played the same song twice because she liked the chorus. We parked near a trailhead and started walking. The forest was bright, not spooky. Birds, sunlight, the smell of crushed leaves. Before anything happened, there were just normal moments. I had to stop to tighten my backpack strap. Balint kept stopping to take photos of mushrooms. Anya handed me gum and I chewed it until my jaw hurt. We joked about how the trail signs were confusing. Then we found the sinkhole. It wasn't marked. It was just there off to the side, an oval depression in the ground, like the forest had opened its mouth slightly. The air coming out of it was cold and damp, smelling like stone. Anya wanted to look closer. Balint wanted a photo. I wanted to keep walking because sinkholes don't feel like tourist attractions when you're standing next to one. We approached and the forest got quiet in that subtle way again, not silent, just less alive. Balint leaned over the edge to take a picture, and a hand reached up from the darkness and touched his camera lens. Just a fingertip, pale and wet, pressing lightly like someone testing glass. Balint yelped and stumbled back, nearly falling. The camera clattered to the ground. We all froze, staring at the sinkhole. I told myself it was a trick, a branch, a reflection, my eyes misreading shadows. Then the hand came again. It rose slowly out of the hole, palm up, fingers spread, and lying across the palm was Balint's car key, the exact key he'd been patting his pocket for earlier, joking about not losing it. Balint went white. How? He started, then stopped. The hand remained there, offering, patient. Anya whispered, "Don't take it." Balint, shaking, reached out anyway. His hand hovered above the pale palm. The pale fingers curled slightly as if ready to close. I grabbed Balint's wrist and pulled him back. Hard, he swore at me, angry and terrified. The hand withdrew instantly into the darkness, taking the key with it. Then the voice came, not loud, not echoing, just present like it was inside our skulls. "Trade." Anya started crying quietly, wiping her cheeks with the back of her glove like she was embarrassed. We backed away from the sinkhole, slow at first, then faster, then running. The forest around us felt suddenly unfamiliar. The trail signs looked different. The sunlight looked flatter. We ran until we hit the car park again and Balint fumbled with his pockets, realizing his key was really gone. We sat there in stunned silence, the 3 of us breathing hard, our bodies trying to process what happened. Balint finally said, "It has my key." Like saying it out loud might make it absurd enough to laugh at. We had to call roadside assistance from the nearest village. It took hours. The aftermath proof came when the tow truck driver opened Balint's car door to check something. On the driver's seat, neatly placed, was the key, dry, clean, as if it had never been underground. And beside it, pressed into the fabric of the seat, was a damp oval imprint, like a palm had rested there, leaving moisture in the exact shape of a hand that didn't belong to any of us. We drove home in silence. None of us wanted to name what we'd seen. Naming feels like inviting. But sometimes Anya will text me late at night, just a single word, "Trade," and I'll stare at it for a long time before replying, because part of me worries she didn't type it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.